The first time my father saw me wearing my Marine Corps dress blues, he didn't recognize me. People always think that's the unbelievable part of the story. It isn't. The unbelievable part is what happened before that. A ballroom filled with veterans in Houston had just risen to its feet after I finished speaking about military families, homeless veterans, and the quiet battles people fight after service ends. Television cameras lined the back wall. Gold Star families sat near the front. Marines in dress uniforms waited beside the stage asking for photographs. And sitting at a table near the rear of the room was the man who abandoned me when I was 15 years old. My father. The same man who left me with $87, a nearly empty refrigerator, and a note that said, "You're tougher than most people. You'll manage." I remember looking across that ballroom while applause echoed through the room. My father looked smaller than I remembered. Older, gray-haired, fragile. His hand trembled slightly against a coffee cup. Beside him sat my older brother, Brandon. His eyes were red. My mother couldn't even look at me. For 18 years, none of them had called on my birthday. None of them attended graduations. None of them attended promotions. They never sent Christmas cards. Never asked where I lived. Never asked whether I was alive. Then one television interview aired. One interview. And suddenly my phone filled with messages. 137 missed calls. Funny how family remembers your number after strangers start applauding you. But none of that started in Texas. It started in Arkansas. Long before the uniforms. Long before the medals. Long before I learned how cold a family can become when love turns conditional, I grew up outside Little Rock in a town small enough that everybody knew everybody else's business before breakfast. My father, Thomas Reed, worked construction. By hands. Heavy boots. Constant smell of sawdust and cigarettes. The kind of man who believed boys were investments and girls were responsibilities. My older brother Brandon could do no wrong. Brandon played football. Brandon went hunting. Brandon worked on engines with Dad every weekend. Brandon was the future. I was simply Claire. Too stubborn. Too opinionated. Too independent. At least according to my father. If Brandon forgot a chore, Dad laughed. If I forgot one, it became a lecture. If Brandon got into trouble, he was learning. If I got into trouble, I was becoming a problem. The double standard wasn't subtle. Everybody saw it. Nobody challenged it. Not even my mother. Her name was Patricia. Soft-spoken. Careful. The type of woman who spent her entire life trying to keep peace inside a house built around somebody else's temper. If Dad criticized me, Mom looked away. If Dad mocked me, Mom stayed silent. If Dad ignored me for days, Mom folded laundry and pretended nothing was wrong. As a child, I thought she was afraid of him. As an adult, I realized she was afraid of losing him. Those aren't always the same thing. When I turned 14, things inside our house started getting worse. Money became tight. Construction work slowed down. Arguments became common. Everybody seemed angry all the time. I started working weekends at a small diner off Highway 67. Nothing glamorous. Just refilling coffee, wiping tables, and carrying plates for truck drivers and retirees. The extra money helped. At least it helped my mother. My father hated it. "Serving coffee at your age?" he muttered one evening. "Real impressive." I looked up from my homework. It helps pay bills. The second the words left my mouth, I knew I'd made a mistake. Dad stood so quickly his chair scraped across the kitchen floor. "You think you're grown now?" "No." "You sure act like it." Mom immediately stepped between us. Not to defend me. To stop the argument. There is a difference. That night, Brandon found me sitting on the back porch. "You've got to stop challenging him," he said quietly. I remember staring at him, then asking a question that would stay with me for years. "Why does nobody ever tell him to stop challenging me?" Brandon didn't answer. Because he couldn't. Deep down, he knew I was right. A few months later, everything changed. It was a Thursday afternoon. October. I came home from school carrying a backpack and a paper sack from the diner. The second I opened the front door, something felt wrong. The television was gone. The recliner was gone. Pictures had vanished from the walls. The house felt hollow. Empty. At first I thought we'd been robbed. Dad? No answer. Mom? Nothing. The silence felt strange. Wrong. I walked into the kitchen. That's when I saw the envelope. My name written across the front. Claire. Just Claire. Nothing else. My stomach tightened immediately. Inside was cash, $87. And a single sheet of notebook paper. I still remember every word. Claire? We moved to Texas. Things weren't working here anymore. You're smart enough to figure things out. Take care of yourself. Dad. That was it. No address. No phone number. No explanation. No goodbye. Nothing. I sat at the kitchen table staring at that note. 5 minutes. 10 minutes. Maybe longer. I honestly don't know. Shock doesn't feel dramatic. It feels quiet. The refrigerator hummed. The kitchen clock ticked. Outside, somebody's dog barked. Normal sounds. Normal life. While mine was falling apart. Eventually, the sun started going down. Orange light filled the kitchen. And reality finally arrived. They were gone. My family had left the state without me. I checked every room, every closet, every drawer, hoping there had been some misunderstanding. There wasn't. They had taken everything. Except me and the contents of my bedroom. Like I wasn't family. Like I was a piece of furniture too inconvenient to move. That first night remains one of the loneliest nights of my life. I locked every door twice. Turned on every light. Sat on the couch listening to cars pass outside. Every sound made me jump. Every headlight passing the window made me think they might be coming back. Maybe there was a mistake. Maybe this wasn't real. Maybe tomorrow everything would make sense. It didn't. Around midnight I finally broke. Not because they left. Because part of me believed I deserved it. That's what happens when people blame you long enough. Eventually you start helping them. And the next morning would bring another shock. Because the first person I called wasn't my mother. Wasn't my father. Wasn't even my brother. It was the only person who had ever truly loved me. My grandmother. And what she said after reading that note would change the course of my life forever. The next morning, I called my grandmother. Her name was Eleanor Reed, my father's mother. The only person in the family who ever made me feel like I mattered. She answered on the second ring. Claire? The second she heard my voice, she knew something was wrong. I tried speaking. Instead, I started crying. For several seconds, I couldn't get a single word out. Then somehow I managed. They left. Silence. What do you mean they left? They moved. Another pause. Who moved? My family. I remember hearing her sharp inhale, the kind older women make when they're trying very hard not to swear. What happened? I explained everything. The empty house. The note. The money. The silence. When I finished, Grandma Eleanor didn't say anything for nearly 10 seconds. Then she spoke. Very calmly. Stay where you are. Grandma. Stay there. Her voice had changed. Harder. Colder. Them leaving was their decision. A pause. You being alone isn't. 3 hours later, she pulled into the driveway in an old Buick that looked almost as old as she was. She was 73 years old. Tiny. Gray-haired. And furious. I had never seen her furious before. She walked into the kitchen. Read the note once. Then folded it carefully. Theodore Reed ought to be ashamed of himself. The words hit me harder than I expected. Because it was the first time in my life an adult had defended me out loud. Not privately. Not quietly. Out loud. I didn't realize how badly I needed that until I heard it. That afternoon we loaded my belongings into her car. Not much. A few boxes. Some clothes. School supplies. The rest of my childhood fit into less space than most people use for vacation luggage. As we drove away, I looked back at the house. For years afterward, I would occasionally dream about it. The driveway. The mailbox. The porch. In every dream, I was still waiting for someone to come back. Nobody ever did. Grandma lived outside Fort Smith. A small one-story house with faded white paint and a porch that leaned slightly to one side. Wind chimes hung beside the front door. The yard was too large for one elderly woman to maintain properly. But somehow she managed. Or pretended to. That first week I barely spoke. I slept on an old couch because there wasn't an extra bedroom. At night I would stare at the ceiling listening to the wind. Waiting. Always waiting. For a phone call. A letter. An explanation. Anything. Nothing came. Grandma never pushed me. Every morning she made coffee. Cooked breakfast. pointed toward the stove, and said the same thing. Eggs are getting cold. That was her version of love. A few days later, Child Protective Services arrived. Someone from school had reported what happened. 2 women sat at Grandma's kitchen table asking questions. Grandma smoked beside the sink while pretending not to listen. "Do you feel safe here, Claire?" "Yes, ma'am." "Do you know where your parents are?" "Texas." "Have they contacted you?" I looked down. "No, Mom." Even saying it felt humiliating. Grandma finally turned from the sink. "They abandoned her." The room went quiet. One social worker shifted uncomfortably. Grandma continued. "You can call it whatever government phrase makes you feel better." She pointed toward me. "But that's what happened." Nobody argued. Because she was right. The state eventually allowed temporary guardianship. I was older, quiet, not considered high risk. I overheard one social worker say that phrase. Not high risk. Funny description. As if abandoned children somehow become less fragile because they stop crying in public. I returned to school the following Monday. That might have been harder than the empty house. Small towns survive on gossip. By lunchtime, everyone knew. One girl whispered loudly enough for me to hear. Her family left without her. Another asked if I'd been kicked out. A third wanted to know if I had done something terrible. Teenagers can be brutal. Not because they're evil. Because they haven't learned empathy yet. After that, I stopped eating lunch in the cafeteria. Instead, I sat behind the football bleachers. Crackers. Bottled water. Silence. One afternoon, my English teacher stopped me after class. Mrs. Bennett. Mid-50s. Kind eyes. The sort of teacher students remember 30 years later. "You're carrying a lot right now." I shrugged. What else was I supposed to do? She studied me for a moment. Then said something that would stay with me. What adults choose to do says something about them. A pause. Not about you. I nodded politely. But I didn't believe her. Not yet. At 16, I still thought abandonment was something you earned. Meanwhile, life with Grandma settled into a rhythm. I continued working after school. A small diner near the highway. Long hours. Minimum wage. Grease stains. Coffee refills. Truck drivers. Factory workers. Retirees. Nothing glamorous. But it paid bills. And it gave me somewhere to go. Older people noticed me. They always do. One regular named Frank left extra tips under pie plates. A retired firefighter named Carl asked about school every week. An elderly widow brought me homemade cookies every Christmas. They were strangers. Yet somehow they treated me better than my own family. Funny how life works. One evening, while washing dishes after closing, I overheard 2 Vietnam veterans talking. They sat in the same booth every Thursday. One of them noticed me listening. "You planning college?" I laughed. "Can't afford it." The other veteran nodded. "Military ever cross your mind?" I shrugged. "Maybe." The first veteran studied me, then said something simple. "The military doesn't care who left you behind." I looked up. He smiled. "It only cares what you're willing to become." The sentence followed me home, followed me to school, followed me into bed at night. For weeks I couldn't stop thinking about it. What if I became something? What if my story wasn't finished? For the first time since my parents left, I started imagining a future. Not survival. A future. Then winter arrived, and life became harder. Grandma's health started declining. Her arthritis worsened. Some mornings she couldn't button her own sweater. I handled groceries, laundry, bills, anything she needed. One night, while organizing medicine bottles at the kitchen table, she looked at me carefully. "You know something?" "What?" "They expected you to fail." I froze. She continued. "The people who leave others behind usually expect the story to end there." I stared at her. She smiled softly. "Don't give them that ending." That sentence became fuel, and a few weeks later something happened at the diner that would change the entire direction of my life. A military funeral luncheon. Dozens of Marines. Dress blues. Perfect posture. Disciplined silence. And one conversation I would never forget. The Marine funeral luncheon took place on a cold Thursday afternoon in January. I remember because sleet had been falling all morning. The diner was packed. Every table. Every booth. Every chair. Marines in dress blues filled the room with a kind of quiet discipline I had never seen before. Nobody laughed loudly. Nobody demanded attention. Nobody acted important. They simply carried themselves differently. I spent most of the afternoon refilling coffee cups and clearing plates while trying not to stare. At 16 years old, they looked larger than life. Not because of the uniforms. Because they seemed to belong somewhere. I had never belonged anywhere. Toward the end of the meal, one older Marine motioned me over. Gray hair. Weathered face. Kind eyes. You thinking about joining someday? I laughed nervously. I don't think they'd want somebody like me. He tilted his head. What exactly is somebody like you? I opened my mouth. Then closed it. Because honestly, I didn't know. Abandoned daughter. Poor kid. Lonely teenager. Those were labels. Not identities. The Marine studied me for a moment. Then smiled. You'd be surprised. I waited. The Corps takes broken people sometimes. His expression softened. Then it teaches them they aren't broken. That sentence followed me everywhere. For months. At school? At work. At night. Especially at night. Because for the first time in years, I started imagining a future that wasn't defined by what my family did. I started imagining a future I built myself. By the time I turned 17, something had changed inside me. Not dramatically. Not overnight. Quietly. Like steel cooling after being forged. I stopped waiting. Stopped checking the mailbox. Stopped hoping for birthday cards. Stopped wondering if my father would call. Stopped imagining my mother suddenly showing up at Grandma's front door. Once you stop expecting rescue, life becomes strangely peaceful. Harder. But peaceful. Grandma and I settled into a rhythm. Every morning began before sunrise. Coffee. Medication. Breakfast. School. Work. Repeat. Money stayed tight. Some weeks we lived on canned soup, eggs, and whatever groceries were on sale. The roof leaked when storms rolled through. The water heater barely worked. But it was still home. More of a home than my parents had ever given me. One night, while carrying groceries inside, I found Grandma sitting at the kitchen table rubbing her chest. You okay? She waved me off. Just getting old. But she looked pale. That scared me. More than I admitted. Because for the first time, I realized I could lose her too. A few weeks later, she handed me an old photo album. Family pictures. Birthdays. Fishing trips. Christmas mornings. Decades of memories. There were dozens of photographs of my father. Dozens of Brandon. Only a handful of me. I pretended not to notice. Grandma noticed anyway. Your father always favored that boy. I stayed quiet. She sighed. Theodore believes men matter more. I looked down at the album. Why? Grandma stared toward the window. Long enough that I thought she wouldn't answer. Finally she did. Because his father taught him that. She shook her head. Men mattered. A pause. Women endured. That sentence stayed with me. Women endured. Maybe it explained my mother too. Years later I would realize something important. Pain moves through families like inheritance. Passed down. Repeated. Accepted. Until somebody finally decides to stop carrying it. A few months before graduation, everything changed again. Grandma collapsed. I heard it happen from the kitchen. A loud crash in the hallway. One of those sounds you never forget. I ran. Found her lying against the wall, struggling to breathe. Her face was gray. Terrified. Grandma. The ambulance took 18 minutes. 18 minutes can feel like a lifetime when somebody you love is gasping for air. The hospital diagnosed heart failure. She survived. But something changed afterward. She became weaker. Slower. More tired. One evening, while organizing medications, she asked me a question. What are you going to do after graduation? I shrugged. Work. She laughed softly. You're too smart for that. I smiled. I can't afford college. What about the military? I looked up. She was serious. Very serious. Grandma nodded toward a Marine Corps commercial playing on television. You need purpose. I stayed quiet. You need structure. Still quiet. And most importantly, she looked directly at me. You need distance from this town. The truth was, I had already been thinking about it. For months. Maybe longer. The Marines. The uniforms. The discipline. The belonging. All of it. A few weeks later, I visited a recruiting office. Staff Sergeant Walker sat behind the desk reviewing paperwork. Tough childhood? I laughed. You could say that. He didn't ask for details. One thing I learned early about Marines. Most don't care where you came from, only whether you'll quit. I started preparing immediately. Running before sunrise. Push-ups after work. Sit-ups in Grandma's living room. Every day. Every chance I got. For the first time in years, I felt momentum. Like I was moving towards something. Instead of away. Then Grandma died. 3 months before graduation. Massive heart attack. No warning. No second chance. I was at school when the hospital called. I don't remember the drive. Only fragments. Red lights. Traffic. Panic. By the time I arrived, she was gone. Just gone. I stood beside her hospital bed completely alone. No parents. No brother. No family. Just me. The funeral was small. A few church friends. Former coworkers. Neighbors. Diner regulars. My parents didn't come. Didn't call. Didn't send flowers. Nothing. After the funeral, I sat alone in Grandma's kitchen, staring at unpaid bills in silence. The house felt empty. Different from the day my parents left. Worse somehow. Then I noticed an envelope, taped beneath the sugar jar. My name written across the front. Claire. Inside was a letter. Claire, if you're reading this, then I've finally become too stubborn for even God to deal with. I laughed through tears. That sounded exactly like her. The letter continued. Listen carefully. You are not unwanted. You are not difficult. And you are not what your father decided you were. Don't let bitterness turn you into him. Build yourself a good life. A life so full of purpose that nobody else's failures can define it. Love always. Grandma Eleanor. I cried harder reading that letter than I had the day my parents abandoned me. Because she was the only person who had ever truly seen me. 3 weeks later, I signed my enlistment papers. The bus left before dawn. 1 duffel bag. A few clothes. And Grandma's letter folded carefully inside my jacket. I was terrified. Not of boot camp. Not of the Marines. Of failing. Of proving my father right. But underneath the fear was something else. Hope? Small. Fragile. Alive. Paris Island hit me like a freight train. The yellow footprints. The screaming. The exhaustion. The chaos. Everything. The first weeks were brutal. I was smaller than most recruits. Slower than some. Stronger than others. But mentally, I was carrying years of damage nobody could see. The hardest battle wasn't physical. It was the voice in my head. The one that whispered, "You don't belong here either." One afternoon during rifle training, I froze during a qualification drill. Completely froze. The drill instructor got inches from my face. "What's wrong with you, Reed?" "Nothing, sir." "Wrong answer." His voice thundered. "Something is always wrong." Then he pointed toward the range. "Fix it." I hated him that day. Years later I understood. The Marines weren't breaking me down. Life had already done that. They were rebuilding me. Piece by piece. Week after week. Month after month. Something changed. I got stronger. Faster. More confident. People started depending on me. Trusting me. Following me. One recruit twisted her ankle during a march. I carried part of her gear. Another recruit had panic attacks after lights out. I stayed awake talking to her until she calmed down. For most of my life, I thought pain only made people harder. But pain also makes people observant. You learn how to recognize suffering because you've lived with it. Near the end of training, a drill instructor stopped me after an exercise. He looked at me carefully, then said something nobody had ever told me before. "You've got leadership potential, Reed." I honestly thought he was talking to someone else. Leadership? Me? The girl left behind? The unwanted daughter? The burden? The idea felt impossible. Then came the crucible. The final test. 3 days later, exhausted beyond words, we stood waiting. Dirty. Broken. Barely able to stand. One by one, instructors placed eagle, globe, and anchor emblems into our hands. When my turn came, the drill instructor looked directly into my eyes. His voice was calm. Respectful. For the first time. "Congratulations, Marine. Marine. Not Boden. Not mistake. Not unwanted. Marine. And for the first time in my entire life, I truly felt like I belonged somewhere. The Marine Corps gave me something my family never had. Consistency. That might sound boring to some people, but when you've spent your childhood walking on emotional landmines, consistency feels like freedom. You know what tomorrow looks like. You know where you stand. You know what is expected of you. And most importantly, you know your value isn't decided by somebody's mood. After boot camp came additional training. Then my first permanent duty station, Camp Pendleton, California. The first time I saw the Pacific Ocean, I stood there for almost 20 minutes staring at it. Not because of the view, because I had never been that far from Arkansas. Never been that far from the girl sitting alone in an empty house. The military gave me opportunities I never imagined. Steady pay, healthcare, education, structure, purpose. But it also demanded sacrifices. Long hours, missed holidays, deployments, broken relationships. The constant understanding that tomorrow was never guaranteed. I deployed overseas for the first time at 21. People often ask what war is like. The truth disappoints most of them. War isn't exciting. It's mostly waiting. Waiting, interrupted by moments you never forget. The event that changed my career wasn't combat. It happened during a humanitarian mission after severe flooding devastated several villages overseas. Thousands displaced. Roads destroyed. Supply chains collapsing. Confusion everywhere. A transportation breakdown left hundreds of civilians stranded without medical support. Senior leaders were arguing. Everyone wanted approval. Everyone wanted permission. Nobody wanted responsibility. I remember standing in a command tent, looking at maps spread across folding tables. People kept debating, talking, waiting, and something inside me snapped. I stopped waiting. I started reorganizing transportation routes, redirecting supplies, assigning vehicles, coordinating civilian evacuations. Nobody told me to. I just did it. 12 hours later, the crisis stabilized. The next day, a colonel called me into his office. I assumed I was in trouble. Instead, he asked a question. Who taught you how to stay calm under pressure? I almost laughed. Life. Life taught me. Because once you've been abandoned at 15, most emergencies seem manageable by comparison. The years passed quickly after that. I attended college courses at night. Studied between deployments. Slept 4 or 5 hours some weeks. Eventually earned my degree. Then another. Then a commission. The first time someone saluted me as an officer, I nearly turned around looking for somebody else. I honestly thought they had the wrong person. But they didn't. The scared girl from Arkansas was gone. In her place stood Lieutenant Claire Reed. Then Captain Reed. Eventually, Major Reed. Every promotion felt surreal. Not because I doubted my abilities, because I kept remembering the note. You'll figure it out. Funny thing is, I did. I figured it out without them. Throughout my career, I kept Grandma's letter nearby. Always. Different desks. Different bases. Different countries. Same letter. Whenever things became difficult, I reread it. You are not unwanted. You are not difficult. You are not what your father decided you were. Those words carried me through more dark nights than anyone will ever know. By my early 30s, I was leading younger Marines. Some came from rough homes. Some came from poverty. Some carried invisible wounds. And every time I met one of them, I saw pieces of myself. The frightened 17-year-old girl who believed she wasn't enough. I made sure they knew somebody saw them. Sometimes that's all people need. Not rescue. Not miracles. Just proof they matter. Years later, I became involved in veteran transition programs. Homeless outreach. Employment assistance. Mental health support. The work mattered. Many veterans leave service with no clear roadmap. Some lose everything. Jobs. Families. Purpose. I understood that feeling. Not because of the military. Because of childhood. One interview led to another. Then local news appearances. Then national programs. Nothing celebrity level. Just enough visibility that people inside military communities started recognizing my name. I never sought attention. Attention was uncomfortable. But the work mattered more than my discomfort. Then, one Tuesday evening, everything changed. I was living near Quantico at the time, working long hours, preparing for a veterans conference. A younger officer texted me, "Ma'am, did you see the interview?" "What interview?" "The one that aired tonight." Earlier that week I had participated in a televised discussion about veteran homelessness. Nothing extraordinary. At least that's what I thought. Apparently someone in Texas disagreed. Around 11 that night my phone started ringing. Unknown number. I ignored it. Then another. Then another. Then another. Voicemails began piling up. Text messages. Emails. Facebook requests. LinkedIn messages. The notifications kept coming. I finally checked one voicemail. The moment I heard the voice, my stomach dropped. Brandon. My brother. The brother who hadn't called in 18 years. "Claire. Please call me back." I sat frozen, listening, trying to process what I was hearing. Then another voicemail. My mother. Then another. Then another. By sunrise, I had 137 missed calls. 18 years of silence. Gone overnight. I didn't answer. Not immediately. I placed the phone face down on the kitchen counter and went to work. That probably sounds cold, but people who've never been abandoned don't understand something. When someone disappears for nearly 2 decades, they stop feeling real. They become memories, ghosts, scars. Then suddenly those ghosts start calling your cell phone. The experience feels less emotional than people imagine. More invasive. At work, I sat through meetings pretending everything was normal. My phone vibrated constantly inside my desk drawer. By lunchtime, there were 3 more messages from my mother. The first was crying. The second was apologizing. The third made me laugh. "We didn't know how to find you." A lie. A ridiculous lie. The Marine Corps had found me every time I moved. Banks found me. Insurance companies found me. The government found me. If my family wanted to find me, they could have. They simply didn't want to. Not until now. That realization sat heavily in my chest. That evening I finally listened to my father's message. His voice sounded older. Weaker, but still familiar. "We should talk." No apology. No explanation. Nothing. Just, family belongs together. I laughed. Not because it was funny. Because it was unbelievable. The man who abandoned his 15-year-old daughter wanted to lecture me about family. I deleted the voicemail, but I couldn't delete what came afterward. The memories. The empty house. The note. The loneliness. The years. Everything came back. One night I sat alone in my apartment reading Grandma's letter again. Rain tapped softly against the windows, and I realized something uncomfortable. Part of me still wanted them to love me, even after everything. Even after 18 years, some wounded part of me still wanted them to say, "We were wrong." That hope made me angrier than the abandonment ever had. A week later, I finally answered a call. Brandon. Sunday morning. I almost ignored it. Something stopped me. "Hello." Silence. Then shaky breathing. "Claire?" His voice sounded exhausted. Older. Broken. "Yeah." Oh my God. Neither of us spoke for several seconds. Then he whispered, "I didn't think you'd answer." I almost didn't. "That's fair." There was another long silence. Then my brother started crying. Not dramatic crying. The kind grown men do when they've carried guilt too long. And what he told me next would explain why my entire family suddenly remembered I existed. "I didn't think you'd answer." My brother's voice sounded exhausted, like a man carrying something heavy for far too long. I leaned against the kitchen counter. "Why now, Brandon?" The silence lasted too long. That told me everything before he even spoke. Finally, he exhaled. "Dad's sick." Of course he was. I wish I could say I felt surprised. I wasn't. Stories like this rarely happen when everybody is healthy. People ignore burned bridges until they realize they may not have enough time left to rebuild them. "What kind of sick?" "Heart problems." He paused. "Diabetes." Another pause. "The kidneys aren't doing well either." I stared out the apartment window. Rain slid down the glass. And suddenly he wants a daughter again. "Claire." "No." I closed my eyes. I was 15 years old. "I know. You left me." "I know. You never called." His voice cracked. "I know." For several seconds neither of us spoke. Then Brandon said something unexpected. I should have done something. The honesty stopped me. Most people defend themselves when confronted with guilt. My brother didn't. I was 16, he continued, but I should have done something. Anger surged through me. Hot. Immediate. You should have. I know. You were my brother. I know. The silence afterward felt enormous. Then I started telling him everything. The empty house. The fear. Sleeping on Grandma's couch. Working diner shifts. Getting mocked at school. Burying Grandma alone. Every piece of it. I didn't hold anything back. By the end, Brandon was openly crying. Then I mentioned Grandma's funeral. He froze. What? Her funeral. His breathing stopped. She died? I frowned. You didn't know? No. The answer stunned me. I sat down slowly. What do you mean you didn't know? Dad told us she stopped speaking to the family. The room seemed to tilt. Even after 18 years, that revelation hit hard. My father hadn't just abandoned me. He had rewritten history. Rewritten reality. To protect himself. To protect the story he preferred. I finally understood something. The silence hadn't happened naturally. It had been built. Maintained. Protected. Brick by brick. Claire. Brandon's voice sounded broken now. I'm sorry. For the first time in 18 years, I believed him. Not because apologies fix anything. Because he finally sounded honest. After a long pause, I asked the question that mattered. Why contact me now? Again, the hesitation. Again, the answer arrived before the words. Then he said it. Dad saw your interview. Of course. The television appearance. The veterans program. The media coverage. The military awards. The public recognition. The applause. Funny how success becomes a searchlight. Suddenly, people who ignored you for years can see you perfectly. A week later, I flew to Texas. Part of me wanted closure. Part of me wanted answers. Part of me simply wanted to see whether guilt actually existed. Or whether this was merely regret disguised as guilt. Those aren't the same thing. The neighborhood outside Austin looked ordinary. Brick homes, trimmed lawns, pickup trucks, wind chimes. The kind of life my father always wanted. Brandon waited outside. The moment he saw me, he started crying. Again, I didn't know what to do with that. Eventually he hugged me. Awkwardly, carefully, like someone trying to hold together 18 years of damage. Then I walked into the house. My mother stood in the kitchen. The second she saw me, she cried. My father appeared a moment later, and everything inside me locked up. He looked old. Not the old I imagined during angry years. Just human old. Gray hair, slower movements, tired eyes. For several seconds he simply stared. Then he said, "You came." I nodded. Nobody knew what the rules were for a reunion like this. Dinner was uncomfortable, painfully uncomfortable. Everybody talked about weather, traffic, travel, anything except the giant wound sitting in the middle of the table. Then I noticed something. Family photographs. Dozens of them. Brandon. Fishing trips. Graduations. Birthdays. Vacations. I searched every wall. Almost no photographs of me. One old elementary school picture. That's it. The realization hit harder than expected. They hadn't simply left me. They erased me. Later that evening, Brandon and I sat outside. Warm Texas air drifted through the neighborhood. Crickets chirped beyond the fence. You want to know the truth? I looked at him. Probably. He sighed. Dad always hated how much you reminded him of Grandma. I frowned. What? Strong. He stared into the darkness. Independent. A bitter laugh escaped me. So he punished me for it. Brandon nodded slowly. I think he did. The next evening came the veterans banquet. The same ballroom where this story began. 300 people. Veterans. Military families. Community leaders. Young Marines. I stood in the hotel room fastening the collar of my Marine dress blues. The ribbons. The brass. The details. Everything perfect. My hands were shaking. Not because of public speaking. Because my father would be sitting in that audience. For years I imagined this moment. Not the applause. Not the recognition. The witness. The moment he would finally see who I became without him. When we entered the ballroom, Marines immediately greeted me. Good evening, ma'am. Good evening, ma'am. "Good evening, Major Reed." I noticed my father watching. Every salute. Every handshake. Every conversation. For most of my childhood, he acted as though I'd never become anything. Now, complete strangers treated me with respect he never gave me. I think that realization hurt him. Good. When my name was announced later that evening, I walked toward the stage beneath soft ballroom lights. 300 people looked up. I spotted my family immediately. My mother crying, Brandon sitting rigid, my father staring directly at me. I adjusted the microphone, and suddenly remembered the note. "You'll manage." Funny thing is, I did. The room quieted. I began speaking. About veterans. About purpose. About rebuilding after trauma. About dignity. Then I said something that changed the atmosphere. When people talk about resilience, the ballroom became silent. They often imagine strength means never being hurt. I paused. But that's not true. I saw my father lower his eyes. Real resilience means being hurt deeply. My voice softened. And choosing not to become cruel afterward. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke, I continued. Some people grow up surrounded by support. A pause. Others learn survival very young. My mother covered her mouth. But no child becomes stronger because they were abandoned. The room remained completely silent. I thought about Grandma, her tiny kitchen, her old Buick, hair litter, the woman who saved my life. What changes lives, I said softly, is when someone finally looks at you and says, my throat tightened. You still matter. The applause began before I finished. People stood. Veterans clapped. Several Marines saluted. The entire ballroom rose. And across the room, my father sat frozen. Afterward, while guests mingled and conversations filled the room, I found him standing alone near the back wall holding a coffee cup. For several seconds, neither of us spoke. Then he surprised me. I was wrong. Simple words. But they looked painful coming out. I waited. His eyes glistened. I spent years thinking toughness meant pushing people. He swallowed. The truth is, his voice cracked. I pushed you away. For the first time in my life, my father looked ashamed. Not angry. Not defensive. Ashamed. And standing there in that ballroom surrounded by strangers who respected me, I finally understood something. I didn't want revenge. Not really. I wanted acknowledgement. I wanted truth. I wanted someone to finally name the wound honestly. No apology could return 18 years. No conversation could restore a stolen childhood. But truth matters. Truth always matters. Because healing cannot begin until somebody stops pretending the damage never happened. As I left the ballroom that night, I thought about the note. You'll manage. He was right about one thing. I did manage. Not because he left me. In spite of it, and the people who truly saved me were never the ones who shared my last name. They were the ones who stayed. Grandma Eleanor, the Marines, mentors, friends, veterans, strangers who chose kindness. Family isn't always the people who raise you. Sometimes it's the people who refuse to abandon you when life gives them the chance. And that made all the difference.